50 days without water in the Apache sun. A Lakota chief found her and gave her life back. The horse smelled her before I did. Gray elk stopped short on the hardpan, ears pitched forward, nostrils working, and I let him stand. That horse had kept me alive through 3 winters on the Powder River. When he stopped, I stopped. Simple as that. I sat still in the saddle, and watched the direction he was pointing, which was south into a dry wash that had not held water since before my son was born. There was nothing moving down there, just the pale rock and the creosote and the heat coming off everything in slow waves. Midday sun in that country will make you see things. I had learned not to trust what I saw. I trusted the horse. I walked him slow along the lip of the wash. The wash ran maybe 15 feet below the rim, carved by old floods into soft clay walls, and at the bottom there were rocks the size of a man's head. Loose shale. Not good ground for a horse. I dismounted, dropped the rein over a cholla, and went on foot to the edge. She was at the bottom of the wash, back against the clay wall, knees drawn up. Small. Dress was gone from the waist up. Cut away, I saw later, for bandaging. What remained was leather below, and nothing above but a strip of cloth wrapped tight around her ribs. Hair was matted into the clay on one side where she'd been lying. Her hands were in her lap, fingers curled loose, the way hands go when a person has stopped fighting. I thought she was dead. I climbed down anyway, not to bury her. I didn't have a shovel, and that wasn't my country, and I had places to be. Climb down because you don't leave a person without checking. That's all. I am not going to dress it up as something more than that. When I got close enough, I could see her chest moving. Small and shallow, but moving. I crouched down beside her. Her lips were cracked white, and her eyes were shut, and she was burning. I could feel the heat off her face before I touched it. I put my hand on her forehead and she flinched hard, went rigid, and her eyes came open. Not soft. Fast and wide, and they went straight to my face. Half Apache. I knew the look, not the blood. I mean the look. The look people get when the desert has been working on them. She said something I didn't catch. Her voice was barely there. I had water. I carried 4 canteens on Gray Elk and had filled 2 of them that morning at a spring an hour east. I went back up the wash wall, got a canteen, came back down. She watched me the whole time I was gone, watched me come back. Her eyes tracked me and never blinked. I gave her a sip. Not more. When you give too much water to a body that's been without it, you make things worse. I had learned this the hard way, years back, with a man named Calls the Elk who was my cousin. And the memory of that mistake sat in me the way a bad memory does. Not as a picture, but as a weight behind the chest. I gave her a sip and pulled the canteen back, and she did not fight me on it, which told me something. She was too far gone to fight, or she had enough sense to trust a stranger, and at that moment I didn't know which. I waited. Gave her more. Waited again. She said, in English that was careful and deliberate, "How far is the nearest water?" Not "thank you," not "who are you?" "How far is the nearest water?" I said, "East, hour ride." She considered this. Eyes moved to the wash walls and then to the sky and then back to me. "I cannot walk," she said. "No," I said, "you cannot." That was the whole conversation. She did not ask me to carry her. I did not ask her permission. I put the canteen in her hands so she had something to hold. Got my arms under her. She weighed less than my saddle with gear. Is not something I wanted to think about, and got her up the wall of the wash. Twice she pushed against the rock with her free hand to help me, even though I could feel what it cost her. She was not a woman who let herself be carried without contributing what she had left to contribute. I filed that away. Getting her up onto Gray Elk was harder. She tried to help and could not, and I finally just lifted her bodily and set her across the saddle. And she held on with both hands wrapped in his mane and her face pressed down against his neck. He stood absolutely still the whole time. That horse, I walked them east. Her name was Siwa. Not an Apache name exactly. She'd told me later it was a Yaqui word her mother used, a woman who'd come up from the south before the wars scattered everyone. Her father was Mescalero, long dead, killed in a raid on a supply column when Sisa was 4. What she remembered of him was the smell of horse sweat and leather, and a song he sang low. When he worked, a sound more than a melody. She had carried that for 30-some years, and that was all she had of him. She'd been in the wash 4 days. Not 50 days. I know what the title says. I'm getting to that. 4 days in the wash with 2 broken ribs, a shallow knife wound in her left side that had gone bad in the heat. No water beyond what she'd sucked out of a cactus on the first day, and nothing to eat. Before the wash there had been more days, but she lost count of those. 50 was what she eventually said, from the time everything went wrong to the time I found her. I didn't argue. She had counted them. I had not been there. What went wrong was a man named Devereaux. I will not spend too much time on Devereaux, because he is not the point of what I am telling you, and because he is dead now. And the dead should not be given more room than they earned. He had been hired to bring her north from the border country, some arrangement with a land agent up in the territory who needed a woman who could interpret for the mescalero bands that still ran cattle in the hills east of the agency. Siwa spoke 4 languages, Apache, Yaqui, English, and a working Spanish. And she had been doing that kind of work for years, moving between the 2 worlds in the way that people who belong entirely to neither world often learn to do. It was useful work. It was also isolating, in a way I came to understand later. The way you understand things about someone not from what they say but from what they never mention. Devereaux had taken the money for the transit, and then decided that was not enough money. She would not tell me exactly what happened after that, not for a long time. And when she finally did tell me some of it, she told it in that flat, way. That means a person has put it somewhere they can manage. I respected that. I did not push. What I knew from looking at her in those first days, the knife wound in her side was not from a fall. The bruising on her arms was not from rocks. She had gotten away free from him. She had run and she had kept running past the point where most people stop running, and the desert had nearly finished what he started. She was alive because she was stubborn in a way I had rarely encountered. I want to be precise about that because it matters. I did not save her. I found her, and I gave her water, and I got her to the spring, and then to the trading post at San Marcos, where there was a woman who knew something about medicine. That is what I did. Kept her alive for 50 days, and 4 nights in that wash was entirely her own. I told her this. Much later. She looked at me the way she looked at things she thought were true, but didn't need saying, which was a particular look she had. Level and quiet, like water finding its place. The trading post at San Marcos was run by a man named Hobart, who had been running it for 20 years and had achieved a species of neutrality that made him useful to everyone and trusted by no one. To the army and to the bands, both. And he did not ask too many questions in either direction. And he had, in the back rooms of his post, a woman named Celia, who had been a surgeon's assistant in the war, and who had stayed when the surgeon moved on. Celia looked at Siwa for about 30 seconds and then looked at me with an expression I recognize from women who are about to do hard work and need someone to hold things. "She'll want you out," Celia said. Siwa said from the cot where I'd laid her, "He can stay." Celia shrugged. She'd worked in field hospitals. She was not a woman with much patience for people's preferences about what they wanted to look at. I stayed. I held the lamp when Celia needed light, and I handed her things. And twice I held Zoswa, still when the pain from the ribs made her body want to curl. Away from what Celia was doing, I pressed my hand flat against her shoulder. Not hard, just present. She breathed through her teeth each time, and did not make a sound. And I watched her jaw and thought about the kind of endurance that is so deep it goes past the place where noise comes from. Celia cleaned the wound and closed it, and wrapped the ribs, and gave Siwa something for the fever that I did not know the name of. It was late by then. The oil lamp was burning low, and the trading post was quiet, except for the horses outside and the dry wind off the flats. Celia left us, and I sat on the floor with my back against the wall because there was nowhere else to sit. Siwa was flat on the cot, face to the ceiling, breathing slower than before. After a while she said, "Where were you going?" I said, "North, to the Tong River. My son's family is up there." She was quiet for a time. "I slowed you down," she said. "Not much," I said. That was a lie. I had been 3 days from the Tong when I found her. We had now been at San Marcos for 2 days, and there were things I needed to get to. Not emergencies, but obligations, the kind that wait on a man when he is away from them. My son's youngest had been sick. My daughter-in-law was managing alone. I thought about these things, and I sat on the floor and I did not move. She said, "Go north." I looked at her. "I will be fine here," she said. "Is competent. Hobart will not bother me," she paused. "You have people to get back to." "I know it," I said. Neither of us moved. The lamp burned lower. The wind pushed at the door. "I will go north in 2 days," I said finally, "when the fever breaks." She turned her head and looked at me across the dim room. I cannot tell you exactly what was in that look. I can tell you it was not gratitude, exactly, or not just that. It was something more like recognition. The look people exchange when they have seen each other in conditions that strip away everything optional, and found that what's underneath is worth noting. She turned back to the ceiling. 2 days, she said. The fever broke on the second morning, which I had not entirely expected. I had seen that color of affection before, and I had buried men who had it. She sat up on her own while I was outside watering the horses. When I came back in, she was sitting on the edge of the cot with her feet on the floor, her hands flat on her knees, looking at the wall with the expression of someone taking inventory. There was still sweat in her hair from the fever breaking. She'd found her shirt somewhere, Celia's I guessed, an old cotton thing, and had put it on. I set down the bucket. She looked up. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," I said. She stood up, tested her legs, took 2 steps toward the window and looked out at the yard and the flats beyond. "I need to eat something," she said. "There's food," I said. "Hobart keeps a pot." She turned from the window. There were shadows under her eyes, and she was still too thin, and she moved like someone whose ribs reminded her of themselves with every breath, and she was upright, and her eyes were clear. I do not know exactly what happened to something in my chest at that moment. I know I looked away at the bucket. We ate in the main room of the trading post, tin, each of Hobart's pork and cornbread, that tasted like it had been cooked a day ago, and kept warm since then. I had been eating this kind of food my whole life. Army food, trail food, whatever was available, and had learned not to require it to be good. Miss Siwa ate without complaint. She ate everything in the tin and looked at it when it was empty. Hobart brought more without being asked. She looked at him briefly, and he looked somewhere else, and I made a note of the whole thing for later. I said, as I was finishing, "I'm going north today." She put her empty tin on the table. "I would like to come with you," she said. I looked at her. "I know," she said. "Ribs." "I'm not asking to ride hard. I'm asking to come with you." She paused. "There is nothing here for me. There is nothing south. And I do not particularly want to be at Hobart's mercy once you are gone." I thought about my son. I thought about my daughter-in-law and the 3 grandchildren and the small house on the Tong River that had not had a woman in it with any evidence since my wife died 6 years before. I thought about the fact that Siwa spoke 4 languages and had been doing interpreter's work, and that there was always need of that in the territory. Always someone who needed the bridge between the 2 worlds. I thought about the way she'd said I would like to come, not I need to come. The distinction was not small. "We ride easy," I said. "Gibbs need another week." "Agreed," she said. "And you tell me if it's too much." She looked at me with the level look. "You tell me," I said again. "I heard you the first time," she said. We rode north for 6 days. The first 2 days she was quiet, which suited me. I have never been a man who needed noise. I had been married to a woman for 22 years who understood that about me, who could sit beside me for an hour without speaking and make that feel like company rather than absence. And after she died, I had found the noise of other people harder to be around, not easier. The quiet of the trail suited me. Siwa rode well. Better than well. She'd grown up on horseback, and it showed in the way she sat Gray Elk's borrowed pace, upright but easy, letting the horse do the work. I had given her the better of my two horses, a steady roan mare named Nothing Special, whose name I had given her years ago as a joke about her appearance, which was not much, whose trail sense was exceptional. Siwa found this out on the second morning, when Nothing Special shied sideways off the trail and Siwa didn't pull against her but let her go and looked where the horse was looking, which was at a rattlesnake thick as my wrist laid out on a warm rock at the trail's edge. She walked the roan around it, calm and wide, and when she came back onto the trail, she said to the horse low and even, "Good girl." That was all. On the third day, she started talking. Not much, but she asked questions, not personal ones, nothing about me directly, about the country, where the water was, what the pass through the Cedars was called, whether the agency up at the fork was federal or territorial. She was mapping, I realized. She had been doing it the whole time, and now she was filling in details she couldn't get by watching. I answered what I knew. Some things I didn't know and said so. She accepted this without complaint, I found. And I want to be careful with this word. Refreshing. I had dealt with too many people, in both the white world and among my own people, who treated a man saying, "I don't know," as either weakness or evasion. It is neither. It is accuracy. On the fourth day, she asked me about my wife. We were riding through pine shadow mid-morning, the ground soft from a night of light rain, and she asked it sideways, not looking at me. "How long have you been alone?" I told her 6 years. She nodded, didn't push. After a while, I told her my wife's name, which was Walks Far Woman, which was not her birth name, but the name she had earned on a winter march when she was 14 that people still talked about when I was young. She had been a practical woman and a generous one, and she had laughed easily, and she had died of a sickness that the medicine men and the white doctor both could not name, which was the worst kind of dying, the kind that has no handle on it. I told Siwa this. I do not know entirely why. It came out the way things come out on a long trail, where the motion loosens something. Siwa listened without interrupting. When I was done, she said, "She sounds like someone who made room for other people." I thought about that. "Yes," I said, "that's right. That kind is rare," she said. "It is," I said. We rode on through the pines, and neither of us said anything more about it for the rest of that day, but I noticed that the silence between us had changed. The way the air changes before rain, not worse, just different, charged with something that wasn't there before. On the fifth night, we made camp beside a creek that had just enough water in it to be useful. She built the fire while I hobbled the horses, which was not the arrangement I was used to. I had been making my own camp alone for 6 years, and it took me a moment to simply accept the division of the work without commenting on it. She had the fire going and the water on by the time I got back, and she had found, somewhere in the pack I'd bought at San Marcos, a small sack of dried corn I'd forgotten about, and she was already working it into something, with the tin cup and a flat rock. We ate and did not talk much, and the creek made it sound, and the horses moved in the grass, and the sky came down full of stars, the way it does in that country when the air is clear after rain. She said, looking at the fire, "I'm going to be a problem for people up there." "You are," I said. "A while." She looked at me. "Half Apache woman coming into a Lakota camp with a chief," I said. "People will have opinions. Will you tell them?" "Whatever I need to tell them," I said. She considered this. "I don't need to be explained or defended," she said. Flat. Not angry, just clear. "No," I said. "But I'll do it anyway. Because it's the right thing, and because it will make things easier for you, and because—" I stopped. She waited. "Because I brought you," I said. "You're my responsibility." There was a pause. "I'm nobody's responsibility," she said. "I'm a free person." "You're a free person," I said. "Who I brought north. Who I am responsible for. Those are not the same as each other. She looked at me for a long moment. The fire snapped once. She looked back at the fire. All right, she said. That was all. Something had settled. I can't say it better than that. It settled the way a house settles after the foundation takes the weight. Not a creak of distress, but sound things finding their place. We came into the camp on the Tong River on the 6th afternoon. My son's spotted horse came out of the house at the sound of the horses and stood looking at me, and then at Siwa, and then back at me without expression, which was how he always looked when he was working something out. He had his mother's eyes and my stubbornness, and he was a better man than I had been at his age, which I considered one of the few real accomplishments of my life. He said, "Father." I said, "Son." He looked at Siwa. I said, "This is Siwa. She will stay with us while she recovers. She speaks Apache and Yaqui and English and Spanish." Spotted Horse said, "Yee." I said. He glanced at his wife, who had come to the door with their youngest on her hip. Something passed between them that I had seen pass between married people 1,000 times. A full conversation in a single look. My daughter-in-law, whose name was Prairie Flower, and who was one of the most practical human beings I had ever met, came down the steps and said to Siwa, "You are hurt?" Siwa said, "Ribs. And a knife wound that's healing. I don't need nursing." Prairie Flower studied her. "Sit down anyway," she said. "You've been on a horse for 6 days." Siwa sat down on the step. Prairie Flower looked at me over Siwa's head with an expression I cannot fully describe. It was not the look a woman gives a man who has brought trouble home. It was the look a person gives another person who they think may have done something right for once. I went and took care of the horses. There was trouble, as I had said there would be. Not from my son's family, who were practical people. From others. There was a man in the camp named Red Tail Hawk who had made himself important in my absence and who did not entirely welcome my return, and who found in Siwa's presence a useful grievance to organize people around. Apache blood, a stranger. What was she? Why was she here? What did she know, and who might she tell? These were not entirely unreasonable questions. I had been in the territory long enough to know that suspicion between the peoples was not invented from nothing. There were histories. There were reasons people had for wariness that went back before I was born. I did not dismiss this. What I did dismiss was Red Tail Hawk using it as a lever. I dealt with this in the way I have always dealt with challenges to what is mine to protect, which is directly and without ceremony. I called a council. I put the facts in front of the men who deserved to hear them. I told them where I had found Siwa, what had been done to her, what she was capable of, and what I intended. I told them she was a free person, and that she was under my protection, and that anyone who took issue with that was taking issue with me personally. Do so to my face. Red Tail Hawk talked for a while. He was good at talking. Waited him out, and then I stood up and said 3 sentences and sat down again, and the council was done. I am not going to tell you I enjoyed any of that. I am 61 years old, and I have been doing that kind of work since I was 30, and it does not get easier, and I have never found satisfaction in it the way some men seem to. What I found was that it needed to be done, and I was the one who could do it, and so I did it. Siwa was told about it later, by Prairie Flower, 'cause Prairie Flower did not believe in keeping people ignorant of things that concern them. She came to find me that evening. I was at the edge of the camp near the horse pen, doing nothing in particular. Looking at the river, the way old men look at rivers. She stood beside me and looked at the river too. After a while she said, "You didn't have to do that." "I know it," I said. "You told them I was free. You are free, and under your protection." Yes. She was quiet. The river was running low, which happened this time of year, and the sound of it was a thin sound, delicate for such a big piece of water. "Those two things are going to keep bumping into each other," she said. "Probably," I said. She turned and looked at me. I turned and looked at her. She had been here 3 weeks by then. The ribs were mostly healed. She moved, without guarding herself, which was the real indicator. not what she said about it. The wound in her side was a thin scar now. She had put on weight. Her face had lost the drawn look it had in the wash and the trading post, and what it had instead was, I'm going to say settled. The way a face settles when a person is no longer spending all their energy on survival, and has some left over for other things, she said. I want to work, I need to be useful. There's need, I said. Agency has been asking for someone who can. I know, she said. Prairie Flower told me. I'll go to the agency Monday. I nodded. I want to pay rent, she said. For the room. No. Yes. No, I said again. She made a sound, not quite a laugh. Something between exasperation and something else. She looked at the river again. You are a difficult man, she said. So I've been told, I said. By how many people? More than I can count, I said. The something else won out over the exasperation, and she laughed, actually laughed, which I had not heard her do before. It was a short sound, but it was real, and it changed the light somehow. I am not a man who says things like that. Change the light, but I have no better way to put it. I looked at the river. She started at the agency, and within 2 weeks she was essential to it. This is not sentiment. This is what happened. The agent, a man named Colby who was neither better nor worse than most men in his position, had been losing half his meaning in every conversation with the Mescalero families. Up in the hills, because his interpreter was a young man from Ohio who had learned book Apache and not spoken Apache, and the difference between the two was the difference between reading about a horse and riding one. Siwa walked in, and within an hour Colby was looking at her with the expression of a man who has been trying to fill a barrel with a teaspoon and has just been handed a bucket. She came home that first evening and said, "They need me 5 days a week." "I know," I said. "How do you know?" "Because it was obvious 6 weeks ago," I said. She looked at me with the level look. "It was obvious the first day you spoke," I said. "When you told me you spoke 4 languages. Any man with sense would have hired you on the spot." She was quiet for a moment. "Colby wants to pay me less than the Ohio boy," she said. Flat. Not asking for outrage, just stating it. "What did you tell him?" I said. "I told him he had 1 chance. To reconsider, and after that, I'd take the number to the territorial office and let them explain to the agency board why. They're underpaying a qualified interpreter," she said. He reconsidered. I looked at her. She said. "Nothing," I said. But I went back to whatever I'd been doing with something that was not nothing sitting in my chest. Pride is not exactly the right word. It's a word, though. It's close. Summer turned into fall on the Tong River, the way it always does up there. Fast. One morning you wake up, and the cottonwoods are yellow and there's a bite in the air that wasn't there yesterday, and you know. I had seen 61 of those turnings, and each one still surprised me a little. The camp settled around Siwa in the way that camps settle around people who are useful and steady. Not warm, not at first. She was still an outsider, and the history that made her one did not dissolve in a season. But functional, respectful, which was what mattered. She had found, in the way people find things when they are looking, a small arrangement with the world. She worked at the agency. She ate with the family most evenings. She helped Prairie Flower with the children. She did, without fuss, and without treating it as charity on either side. And the children took to her the way children take to people, who treat them like small human beings rather than projects. My youngest grandson, who was 4, and whose name was Little Stone, had decided she was his personal property and had begun following her around the camp with the dedication of a dog who has chosen his person. She endured this with what I could only describe as disciplined affection. She never encouraged it, and never discouraged it, and he was always exactly where she was. I watched all of this from a certain distance, feet. That is how I had always been with people. A little back, a little outside the circle. Walk's Far Woman had been the same way, and we had suited each other for it. You can be close to someone and still give them room. In fact, I think that is the only real way to be close to someone. I was close to Sewa in that way, or beginning to be. The night it became something else was in late October. We had been at the camp 5 months by then. There had been no more trouble from Red Tail Hawk, who had shifted his complaints in another direction, which was his habit. Siwa's ribs had been healed for months. She rode out to the agency every morning on Nothing Special, whom she had bought from me in August, at a price I considered too high, and she considered fair. We had argued about it for 3 days before I accepted the money, because she would not stop and I had no good argument left. It was late and cold and I was sitting outside the main house because I had not been sleeping well. The way old men don't sleep, waking at 2 in the morning, with nothing wrong and everything restless. I had a blanket over my shoulders and I was looking at the stars. Extremely present, the way they get in October up there, when there's ice in the air and no cloud. She came out and sat on the step. "Go back to sleeps," she said. I wasn't sleeping, why not? She was quiet for a moment. "Dream," she said. I didn't ask. You don't ask. She would tell me or she wouldn't. She pulled her own blanket around her shoulders and looked up at the stars. A minute passed. 2, she said. I was in the wash again. "Ah," I said. "It passes," she said, "usually." "I know," I said. I did know. I had my own dreams from my own years. Dreams that had passed and some that hadn't. Another minute. Then she moved. Off the step, down to where I was sitting against the wall, and she sat down beside me, close enough that I could feel her warmth through the blanket, and she leaned. Not into me, exactly, not completely, just put her shoulder against mine and looked up at the stars. "I did not move," she said. "You never flinch." "What?" "When things happen. You never flinch." She was quiet. "Not when you found me, not at the council, not when Red's Tailhawk was making noise. You just do what needs doing and then you're done." "That's age," I said. "Mostly." "No, it isn't," she said. "I've known old men who flinched at everything." I didn't answer. "I don't say things I don't mean," she said. I knew that. She had shown me that 100 times by then. "I know," I said. "Then you know what I mean," she said. And that was how it was said. Quietly, sideways, with the stars out and the camp asleep, and the river making its October sound below us. She was not a woman who needed ceremony, and I was not a man who required elaborate declaration, and so it was said in the plainest possible way, and received in the plainest possible way. I put my arm around her shoulders. She settled her weight against me, and the blankets overlapped, and we sat there in the cold and looked at the sky. I could feel her breathing, even and slow, not the shallow, frightened breath I had heard in the wash, just breath. After a long time, I said, "I'm glad you came north," she said. "I know. I am too." She turned her face up toward mine and looked at me, and I looked at her. For a moment, I thought about everything that had led here. The wash, and gray elk stopping on the hardpan, and the spring, and San Marcos, and 6 days on the trail, and the council, and Little Stone trailing after her through the camp. And it seemed in that moment less like a series of separate things, and more like a single long thing that had been going in one direction, the whole time, without either of us knowing it. I am not a man who traffics in fate. I believe in choices and in the things that come from choices. But I will say this. In 61 years I had made a lot of choices. Finding water, reading weather, knowing when to hold ground and when to move, knowing which fights were worth it and which ones would only cost you. Pulling her out of that wash. Riding easy, staying 2 more days in San Marcos, when I should have been going north. Taking her in front of the council and saying she is mine to protect. All of it was a choice, every piece of it. And I made each one without knowing the next one was coming. And yet here we were, shoulder warm against me. The stars out. The river quiet. Winter came down hard that year on the Tong River. Three weeks into November, the temperature dropped the way it sometimes does in that country. Not gradually, but like a door closing. One day 40 degrees, and the next morning you wake up, and it's 10, and everything you left outside is frozen solid. I had weathered hard winters up there before, but I had been alone for the last 6. And I had forgotten certain things about the difference between weathering a winter alone and weathering one with a household. The difference I found was significant. It is not that I needed the help, exactly. I had managed, but there is weight to management that you stop noticing until it lifts. The horses were a daily requirement. Water, feed, checking their hooves for ice balling. And I had always done that alone. And Siwa had started doing the morning water while I did the feed without us discussing it. The way people who live in close quarters work out the logistics, without making speeches about it. Prairie Flower and my son were 20-odd yards away, in the main house, and they helped when things were heavy. But the small house that I had been rattling around in alone for years had found its own rhythm. Little Stone refused to stay in the main house in the mornings, and Prairie Flower brought him over after breakfast. And he sat near the stove and got in the way, and Siwa taught him things, words in Spanish and Apache and Yaqui, and he repeated them, with the confidence of a 4-year-old who has no idea he is mispronouncing. And everyone pretended he wasn't. In the evenings he went back to his parents. I had not anticipated what it was like to have a child in a house again. I had not entirely anticipated what it was like to have any of it. After Walk's Far Woman died, I had told myself, not as a lie, exactly, as a reasonable assessment, that the part of my life involving a household, a woman, warmth in that particular sense, was finished. I had done it. I had done it well, I thought. I had 3 grandchildren. My son was whole and good. The life I had built had come to its natural end, and what remained was the long downhill of age, which I intended to walk with dignity and without complaint. I had been wrong about that. Shh. I am telling you that I was wrong about it, because I think it matters to say it plainly. The first time Siwa mended one of my shirts, just picked it up off the pile, sat down with needle and thread without asking, pared a tear in the shoulder seam. I had been ignoring for a month because I hated that kind of work. I had to go outside for a minute, not because it made me sad exactly, because it hit me in a place I had thought was closed. I stood outside in the cold for about 2 minutes and looked at the sky and thought about Walk's Far Woman, and I said what I usually said to her in those moments, which was, I know. Then I went back inside. Siwa was at the table, threading the needle back through the tail end of the thread. She did not look up. Cold out, she said. Yes, I said. Good fire in here, she said. Yes, I said. That was all. She finished the shirt and put it on my chair. I sat down and picked it up and looked at the mend, which was small and neat. Thank you, I said. It's a shirt, she said. It was a shirt, and it was not a shirt. But I did not say the rest of that, and neither did she, and we did not need to. By February, I had asked her to marry me, which I want to be clear, was a more complicated undertaking than it sounds. There were the practical matters. Her standing in the camp, which had improved but which a formal arrangement would confirm. My son's opinion, which I did not need but which I wanted because I respected him. The agency's position, because Colby had made certain assumptions about C's independence that a marriage to a Lakota chief would complicate. And Siwa had strong views about her work and her independence. And we had to talk about those views at length and with honesty. And there was the matter of Walk's Far Woman. Not as an obstacle, as a truth. She had been my wife for 22 years. And she had been good, and she had been mine, and I had been hers, and that did not disappear. It sat in me. Siwa knew this, because I had told her, and because she was a woman who paid attention, and because she had her own history of losses that she sat with. In the same way, not dissolved, not set aside, just present. One night in January, when the wind was doing its worst, outside, and the stove was going hard, and we were on either side of it with the lamp between us, she said, loved her. Yes, I said. You still do, she said, not an accusation. You still love your father, I said, the one you have 4 memories of. She was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. That's not nothing, I said. And it doesn't close a door. She looked at the stove. I'm not asking you to replace anything, I said. I am asking you to come alongside. There's room. She looked at me then, across the lamp. and I saw on her face something I had not seen there before, which was, I'll call it, a lowering of something. A wall that I had not seen as a wall because she carried it so naturally, to the armor of a woman who had been entirely on her own for most of her life, and had been hurt by the world more than once, and had survived it by never fully putting herself in another person's hands. She was putting herself in my hands. Partially, she would never be the kind of person who did it entirely. And I did not want that. I wanted the woman who told me she was nobody's responsibility. I wanted the woman who told Colby he had one chance. What I was asking her to do was simply to know that those things, that independence and that strength and that particular hard-won self, would be safe with me, would be seen, would be valued. She said, "You'll have to ask Spotted Horse." "I know," I said. "I'll ask him tomorrow." She looked back at the stove. "All right," she said. I said, "That's yes?" "Don't push it," she said. But her mouth did the thing it did sometimes, the thing that was almost a smile, in that flickering lamplight with the wind outside, and the stove doing its work. I felt something I had not felt in 6 years, which was simply and completely this: that I was not alone, and that the woman across from me was there by choice, freely made, and that she had seen exactly who I was, and exactly what I was, and had said all right. Not out of desperation, not out of gratitude, not because she had nowhere else to go. She had the agency. She had her work. She had the independence she had bled to rebuild, because she had looked at me and found me worth staying for. I looked at the lamp. The wick needed trimming. I would do that tomorrow. Spotted Horse said yes, which I had known he would, because he was a sensible man, and because he had watched his father be alone for 6 years, and he had watched Siwa for 5 months, and he was not a man who confused things being complicated with things being wrong. He asked me 2 questions. Was I sure? Second, did she know what she was getting into? I told him I was sure. I told him she probably had a clearer view of what she was getting into than I did, which made him laugh. Prairie Flower said, finally. Then she went back to what she was doing. We were married in March, when the snow was still on the ground, but the worst of it was past, in a ceremony that was partly Lakota and partly something else that Siwa put together herself from pieces of the traditions she carried, and Colby came from the agency, which surprised me. And Little Stone stood between us, the whole time in the way that 4-year-olds do when they have decided an event concerns them personally. After, when the camp had gone back to its business, and the day had settled into evening, we were outside by the horse pen. Her hand was in mine. The river was running again, loosened by the March thaw, and the sound of it was fuller than it had been all winter, she said. 50 days, I said. What? From the time everything went wrong, she said. Counted. 50 days before you found me. I thought about the wash, the hard pan, gray elk stopping, the slow climb down to the clay floor. 50 days, I said. She looked at the river. Her hand was still in mine, and she turned it once, just once, not holding, exactly, or like testing the weight of the thing in her palm, the way you hold something you didn't expect to get to hold. Long time, I said. Yes, she said. The river ran. The horses moved in the pen. Up the slope, the camp made its evening sounds. Someone's fire, the high voice of a child. A horse answering another horse somewhere in the dark. She leaned into my side, not to hold herself up, just to be there. And I stood steady and let her be there and felt the weight of her against me and thought, this is what it is to be needed, not to be necessary in the way a tool is necessary or a horse is necessary. To be needed the way that you need a place to stand. The sun was going down behind the hills, on the far side of the river, dragging the light off the water and leaving something soft and gray in its place. The cedars up the slope were going dark. Everything was going quiet. I am 61 years old. I have buried a wife and survived 3 hard winters alone, and stood in front of councils and made choices that were right, and some that I still live with. I have been on this earth long enough to know that very few things are given. Most things you fight for, or wait for, or find by accident in a dry wash, When your horse stops on the hardpan for reasons you don't understand. I looked at the river. I looked at her beside me, her face in the gray evening light, the line of her jaw, the set of her shoulders that I had come to know. The way you know the terrain of country you've ridden for years, particular way she held herself, that was not hardness, but readiness. And under that, underneath the armor that the world had made necessary, something open, something that had chosen to be open. That was the hardest thing. That was the gift. Not the choosing in a weak moment or that one, but the choosing with clear eyes, by a strong woman who knew exactly what she was doing. The river ran cold and silver in the last of the light. I held her hand. That was all. That was enough.